And when everything is disconnected, you get into a situation where the whole is only the sum of the parts, or maybe it's even less. But when everything starts to connect, you start to see compounding benefits. So the whole actually becomes greater than the sum of the parts.
Hey gang, it's Tuesday, April 26th. Listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by mParticle. I'm Marcus. Today's fact, it's a myth that bees can only sting you once. I'm here to tell you, the only bee with a single sting is the honeybee. However, bumblebees, wood bees, and yellow jacket wasps will attack you repeatedly. Hornets too, okay? They'll really mess you up. According to an article in Forbes, they don't even bother stinging you because they're large enough to bite, which is troubling. This is one of those facts similar to, when you're supposed to make noise around one kind of bear and stay perfectly still around another kind? Who is composed enough to identify the kind of bear that we're working with and then what action we should take? It's a bear. Of course I'm going to try and run away and get caught and then probably savagely killed. Because I shouldn't have been near it. I should have, is his home or her home. Shouldn't have been there. The same with bees, just leave them alone. Don't work out whether you're going to be okay, because if it stings you, it dies. Just leave it. Anyway, today's real topic. A conversation between CEO and co-founder of customer data platform mParticle, Michael Katz, and our principal analyst heading up our marketing practice, Dave Frankland, where they discuss tackling data chaos.
I've been writing and covering customer data for years and would argue that we're living in an era of immense opportunity, but with so much changing quickly, it's also an extremely challenging time. So I'm really excited for today's conversation with Michael Katz, who's the CEO and co-founder of mParticle, a customer data infrastructure company which helps businesses manage customer data across the product and customer lifecycle. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to dig into that description of customer data infrastructure. I think everyone knows that as our lives become increasingly digital, we leave behind an enormous trail of data. The analytics firm Domo estimates that 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created each day by internet users worldwide. Brands, meanwhile, are trying to use that customer data to understand their customers and deliver a better experience. But it's hard to capture, analyze, and use all of that data. So maybe a great place to start today would be to take a step back and explain what's meant by customer data infrastructure and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you did a great job at kind of setting the overall stage on a brand by brand basis. When you think about the digital properties and experiences that they create, there's just been this explosion of data. Corresponding to that, there's also been an explosion of tools. So there's more data being created and consumed than ever before. Now you throw an ever-changing privacy landscape into the fold, and then all of the changes from like Apple and Google over the past few years with respect to like what identifiers you can use and what you can't use, things become pretty complex like fairly quickly. And so one thing that we've seen is that the walled gardens, places like Facebook, for example, have fundamentally changed. Right? Like they used to be places where you could run user acquisition campaigns at scale. It was a bit of an easy button. Problem was brands kind of became a little bit too addicted. With all that change, though, now brands have to build their foundation kind of rooted in first-party data. They have to own the relationship with the customer. They can't rent their results. They can't outsource the relationships to the extent that they once did. And you see that transforming a number of industries, certainly like CPG and automotive and kind of the whole direct-to-consumer movement is really all about establishing a direct relationship and an ongoing relationship with your customers. You see it in like the media and entertainment space, the adaptation from an ads-first business model to more of a subscription model. And it's all rooted in acquiring consented user information, organizing that information, and then utilizing that information to create and optimize great world-class digital experiences. Because at the end of the day, brands are built on digital experiences. And the better the experience, the better the brand. Now, what customer data infrastructure allows brands to do is organize that information, but also protect the integrity of that data, instantiate mechanisms to protect data quality, data governance, and then ultimately make that data completely portable, make it easily connected to all of the different tools that are out there that teams use to run and grow their businesses. And our view on the world is that you have a lot of CDPs out there nowadays. It feels like everybody's a CDP or everybody's
CDP being customer data platform?
Customer data platform, yeah. I'll probably throw out a few more acronyms, so apologies in advance. It's definitely become a bit of a buzzword. And I think the vast majority of customer data platforms are solving maybe like the part of the problem that is like very apparent and that like most marketers can see. It's like the part of the iceberg that kind of has emerged above the surface. So they'll focus on segmentation and audience insights and marketing output. Our belief as CDI, customer data infrastructure, is that everything beneath the surface is really where the value is created or lost. So data is being created in lots of different places. It needs to be unified. So how well you can organize that information. What is the right format? What is the right structure? Do you have a data strategy in place? One thing that we see is like everything is in a kind of constant state of flux. And so what those changes usually do is they usually like break things. And so how well you can adapt to that change ultimately dictates like how well you can actually execute your digital strategy. People like to say, well, I have this great strategy and I know the tactics I want to implement, but then the digital ecosystem changes, or maybe an engineer makes a mistake and that breaks the pipeline, or vendor APIs get updated and your data connection stop. Like there's always something breaking, but people want to treat that breakage as like, oh, it's like this thing that other people have to deal with. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. Like nothing is somebody else's problem. If things are breaking, you can't actually execute your digital strategy. So that's what, in our view, what CDI allows teams to do is build that really strong foundation to be able to be adaptable in service of activation.
So there's a lot going on below that surface as you described it, right? But also just the sheer speed at which data is coming into companies, the variety of formats that's coming in because we're communicating across all these different platforms. None of it sounds easy, right? So share your perspective on what are the pitfalls? Where do most teams trip up?
Yeah. Well, let's start with a few maybe indisputable truths. So the activation of data or the execution of digital strategies, it's only going to be as good as the quality of data that powers those experiences. We've all kind of heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Well, when you think about this promise that the marketing industry has had for, as long as I can remember, about getting the right message to the right user at the right time, really what that's about is like getting the right data into the right system in real time. And if the quality of that data is no good, the experience is going to be no good. So that's kind of first point. Second is that like privacy and compliance are no longer an afterthought. They need to be completely integrated into your data streams, into your data flows, and they need to be treated as like first order needs. And when you think about the way that a lot of teams handle privacy, it's like, oh, well, that's, again, somebody else's problem. I'll send a request and maybe they'll delete data from the data warehouse. Well, that doesn't do it. Most companies use, I think the latest stat I saw was upwards of like 100 different SaaS tools. And if there's a single person who wants their data expunged, you need to get it out of all of those tools, right? And so you need to think about at the infrastructure layer, do you have mechanisms to be able to govern your data flows to keep you out of trouble? It's one thing to play great offense, but you also need to play defense as well. I think the latest stat I saw was that the EU has handed out over $1 billion of fines related to GDPR. Most recently, the whole mess around Google Analytics, and the money's real. Like the fines are very much real and there's a lot at stake. And then I'd say like the final point is just like speed matters. Kind of going back to playing offense, marketing in the moments that matter ultimately can be the difference between you winning or your competitor winning. And we're all super ADD. We're all hopping different devices and changing forms and modalities or form factors rather. And so the challenge is like, how fast can you move data to different systems to be able to personalize the experience? Because I think as consumers, we all feel entitled at this point, right? For better or worse, companies like Netflix and Amazon, like the FANG companies, have all spoiled us. They know like where we dropped off on one device or on one form factor and where they need to pick up. It's seamless. And when brands don't have that capability now, we're all judging all the time. We're saying like, wow, they don't get it. Like they must be really young or immature or unsophisticated. And so making sure you can connect all those dots is critically important to delivering the types of experiences we've all come to expect.
Yeah, so when we chatted earlier, you used a great phrase about data chaos. What do you mean by that?
Well, the state of like the digital ecosystem is always in flux, right? Your digital strategies will always evolve, right? New campaigns get run, new experiments get created. What impact does that have? Well, teams are asking for probably new vendors, or even existing vendors will update their APIs. They may add a new service. They may add an entirely new API. What does that entail? Well, now you need to change your event tracking. Landing pages will get spun up or optimized or wound down as campaigns, and you may continue to optimize your site, your app experience. So like there is no such thing as like kind of set it and forget it. There is no such thing as steady state. The only constant is change. And so as those changes materialize throughout the organization, if you don't have the ability to adapt to those changes, if those changes actually break your data schema, your data pipelines, your vendor connections, your customer experience, well, that's where digital strategies fall flat. And that's ultimately like what data chaos is. It's a rate of change problem, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. So let's switch to the positive, if you like.
Yeah.
When a company gets their data in place and sort of has it in a manageable state, ton of opportunity. One of the areas that I get a lot of questions on relates to personalization. Mm-hmm. So I know you guys help companies figure this out. What should people think about and know as they invest in personalization?
Well, first thing is kind of like what I've been saying, which is that value will either compound to the upside or the downside, depending on how well you can adapt to all of the change in the space, right? And you do have to adapt, and you also have to incorporate privacy into the mix, because the flip side of personalization is privacy. So just to kind of reestablish the baseline, if the output is an adaptive experience so that you're not delivering kind of this like one size fits all, where that one size really fits none type of approach, you need to make sure that those things are in place. Like, what does good look like from a personalization standpoint? So much of what we do ultimately helps teams organize data from disparate sources and to create deterministic, very predictable views of the customer. Now, that's not to say that we want to capture everything. We actually advise our customers not to capture everything, but it's about capturing the things that are relevant. What do you know about your customers that will ultimately help kind of move the needle in terms of getting them to engage or transact? And so what does personalization look like? I think it's about creating the greatest level of confidence that you can create based on what you know about the user and what they're interested in. And whether your business model is ad supported or if it's commerce supported, that may be product recommendations, it may be content recommendations, but then also making sure that those experiences are consistent across all the different touch points, right? So it's like you want to create relevancy, but you also want to create consistency. I may interact directly on a site. I may see an ad. I may get an email. I may go into a store where there's like a digital experience or whatever the situation may be. If I'm a different person at each one of those touch points, because all my data is disconnected, it's not going to feel consistent. And ultimately that consistency is what drives personalization.
Yeah. all of this requires change inside an organization, right? So to shift from this traditional way of doing things to a more modern, agile approach. Real quick, do you have one piece of advice for companies as they're thinking about the change management aspect of all of this?
I mean, it's huge, right? First things first, like we've been talking about the data and the technology. No technology will get any company all the way there. It's people, process, platform, right? Like same as it's always kind of been. So you have to be willing to adapt and evolve. And again, change is thrust on everybody all the time, whether we like it or not. People will say, well, change is hard. It's hard if you view it that way, right? Change is necessary, right? How do you successfully undertake change? Well, it starts with having a good strategy, right? More specifically in context of this conversation, a data strategy. So making sure you think through what data should I be capturing? How does that data map to how I measure the health and success of my business, how I think about customer segmentation, how I want to engage and optimize the customer experience? What does the stack ultimately look like today? How might it evolve over the course of time? And you don't have to figure it out all at once. You can be iterative, but that's really like the first step. And that's the thing that we see a lot of companies skip actually, because it's tough, right? You have to step back and you have to kind of slow down in order to speed up. And if you don't, though, you're going to probably hit a series of local maximums where you'll get value out of the tools and the tactics that you employ to drive growth, but then you'll hit a ceiling. And when everything is disconnected, you get into a situation where the whole is only the sum of the parts, or maybe it's even less. But when everything starts to connect, you start to see compounding benefits. So the whole actually becomes greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. Okay. Personally, Michael, I could stay and talk about this all day, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for. You have provided some really great insights and actionable advice for our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
That's all we've got time for the lead. Time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, mParticle. At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to www.mparticle.com. All right, folks, joining me for In Other News, we have Dave, who you heard in the first half. Dave, thanks for sticking around.
Oh, great.
Dave, are you there?
Great to be here.
Dave, don't leave me in Other News. I have no idea what these stories are about, but let's give them a whirl. Today, in other news, US digital ad revenues enjoyed their biggest jump, and Netflix is launching a 2 thumbs up feature. Story 1. US digital ad revenues enjoyed their biggest jump last year since 2006, growing by 35% to $189 billion. 189 per a new report from the IAB and PwC, notes Insider Intelligence analyst Daniel Konstantinovich. He points out that though the IAB didn't name companies, the top 10 took home nearly 80% of the digital ad revenue, showing the continued dominance of big tech despite recent ad tech clashes with regulators. Daniel also notes that we forecast that Google, Meta, and Amazon collectively will account for nearly 2/3 of all digital ad revenues this year. But Dave, the most interesting part of the digital ad market for you right now is blank.
Is positive chaos. What I mean by that is there's just sands are shifting everywhere. There's a lack of clarity and yet huge opportunity. So consumer behavior is changing. Technology is changing, platforms are evolving, regulation is changing. There's just a need for rethink across the board. And so you think about our behavior as consumers, whether that's multi-screening, brands being required to sort of operate on a sort of TikTok timeline, You guys talked last week about the changes between linear and CTV. You look at the growth of digital out of home. Digital is everywhere, as we've been saying for years it would become, but not everything is straightforward. There isn't an easy answer to everything. So brands, agencies, everybody is having to evolve and rethink how they do things. The old ways don't work anymore.
Yes, sir. Interesting thing for me was that the fastest growing category for advertisers was podcasting, which surprised me. It's fastest growing, it's from a small base, but it still surprised me. It grew 58% to nearly $5 billion, apparently. So, yeah, that was...
I'm a case study of one, but it is probably my highest or top 2 source of media right now.
Yes! That's the only reason we let you on the podcast. I'm kidding. Story 2. Netflix is launching a 2 thumbs up feature to allow the streaming giant to improve viewing recommendations for subscribers, per The Verge, notes Insider Intelligence briefing director Jeremy Goldman. The 2 thumbs up button joins the already familiar thumbs up and thumbs down buttons that you're used to if you're a Netflix person. But this one lets subscribers show a higher degree of interest in a particular show or movie. And Jeremy reminds us that Netflix had a 5-star rating system until 2017, when it was replaced with a thumbs up and thumbs down. But, Dave, the best example you've seen of personalization is blank.
So I think of personalization in a few different ways. I think there's a product personalization. I've always held up Indochino as one of the really interesting examples of that. Susie just interviewed their CEO on here recently. One of the ones I thought was brilliant this past Christmas, my son gave me Dave's Bees, which is Burt's Bees, except on it said Dave's Bees. You're able to literally get it personalized.
Nice.
So that's one form of personalization. I think the Netflix, Spotify sort of, surface up based on what you've done. Here's things you might be interested in. Those are companies I would think of. I think there's sports brands, Adidas, Nike, who allow you to sort of tailor your sneaker to yourself. So personalization is both sort of how I choose to personalize, but also then what the brand or marketer does. From a marketing point of view, one of my favorite examples actually comes from Europe. It's a Belgian cinema chain owner. They're all over Europe, but Kinopolis. They send an opportunity, every email they send to us only 7% of their file. And that is because they understand what are the types of movies you watch, when did you last watch them, how often do you go, etc. And they use all of those various inputs to determine who's going to receive the message. That to me is true personalization. They refer to it as marketing as a service. So they take it away from marketing as bombardment and think about what does the consumer want from this and think of it as a service.
And that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you to Michael, joined us in the first half. Thank you to Todd. He's helping us edit the show. Thanks to everyone listening. We'll see you tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Reimagining Retail and eMarketer podcast made possible by mParticle.